A $250 pistol that keeps up with a Glock in a 1,000-round torture test sounds like clickbait until you watch it happen on the firing line. That's the dirty little secret of the handgun world right now. If you know where to look, there are sub-$300 guns that punch way above their weight in accuracy, reliability, and features. And they're quietly embarrassing guns that cost twice as much. In this video, we're breaking down 10 of the best budget handguns under $300 that don't just work. They outsmart the so-called premium guns they're supposed to be scared of. These are the pistols that keep running when people expect them to choke. That group just as tight on paper, that give you things like 18-round mags, great triggers, and solid ergos for the price of a mid-range red dot. And we're not just praising them in a vacuum, we're stacking them mentally against the Glocks, M&Ps, CZs, HKs, and SIGs they're trying to steal customers from. Let's start with the gun that has shocked the most skeptics, the Taurus G3. Taurus used to be the punchline when people talked about cheap pistols. Then the G3 showed up and forced a lot of those same people to shut up and shoot. In one 1,000-round test, a shooter put cheap range ammo through a $250 G3 and walked away calling the accuracy pretty crazy for the cost, regularly ringing steel and holding tight groups at typical defensive distances. That's Glock-level practical performance out of something you can buy for roughly half the price. Reliability? In multiple long-term reviews, shooters report 600 to 700 rounds of mixed FMJ and hollow points with no malfunctions. The G3 tactical variant has been pushed hard with 650 to 700 rounds of different bullet weights. Again, no stoppages, solid ejection, consistent lockback on empty. At that point, the "it's cheap, so it must be unreliable" argument stops making sense. Are there occasional QC quirks? Sure. But the idea that a budget Taurus automatically fails every reliability test just doesn't match what people are seeing on the range right now. Feature-wise, the G3 feels like a value spec sheet someone built after staring at a Glock 19 and saying, "What if we throw in extras?" You get 15 or 17-round mags, a frame with usable texture, a decent trigger with a restrike capability, and, on some models, optic-ready slides and threaded barrels, all well under $300 street. Compare that to a basic Glock 19. Same ballpark capacity, similar size, no optics cut unless you pay more, and a price that often sits in the $500 to $600 range. Functionally, for most owners at typical distances, the G3 and the Glock will shoot the same drills with very similar results. The difference is how much money you have left for ammo afterward. Next up, the Ruger Security 9, the budget compact that's quietly playing in Glock 19's backyard. On paper, the Security 9 mirrors the Glock 19 in all the important ways: compact 9mm, 4-inch barrel, 15+1 capacity, polymer frame. But when people actually run them side by side, the Ruger doesn't just keep up, it steals a few points. In direct comparison tests, reviewers have called the Security 9 very accurate and reliable, noting that its real-world accuracy is essentially on par with the Glock. One evaluation even gave a slight advantage to the Ruger in the head-to-head, thanks to its shooting comfort and trigger feel, while pointing out that the Ruger costs roughly half the price of the Glock. The Security 9's trigger averages around 4.3 pounds on a gauge, with a bit of take-up and a clean break, and the recoil is manageable. You do lose some Glock modularity and aftermarket support, and the Ruger's grip doesn't use interchangeable backstraps. But the core experience, how fast you can get hits, how confident you feel running it, is shockingly close to its $600 rival. That's the theme you're going to see over and over in this list. Performance parity where it counts, at a fraction of the sticker price. Sliding into the third slot, we've got the Smith & Wesson SD9VE, the sleeper S&W that budget shoppers keep rediscovering. The SD9VE looks simple, but it delivers more than you'd expect. It's a striker-fired 9mm with a 4-inch barrel, 16+1 capacity, and a stainless slide over a polymer frame. The grip texture and serrations are designed for a solid hold even with sweaty hands, and reviewers praise how secure it feels under recoil. It ships with 2 chrome-finished magazines, and the mag system itself is well regarded. Smooth feeding, easy to count remaining rounds, and solid reliability. In durability tests, the polymer frame and stainless slide hold up for hundreds of rounds with no drama. It's not as refined as the flagship M and P line, and the trigger is often criticized for being a bit heavy and spongy out of the box. But that's where the price comes in. Street prices often hover in the low 300s, and deals can bring it under that $300 mark, making it one of the best big brand entries into budget territory. For a home defense or range gun, the SD9VE often does 80 to 90% of what an M and P9 does for significantly less cash. Now let's talk about the Canik TP9 series, particularly the TP9SA/SF models that routinely make people say, "How is this cheap?" Canik came out of nowhere for a lot of American shooters and immediately made waves with their triggers. The TP9SF, a full-size 9mm with an 18+1 capacity and a 4.46-inch barrel, is often praised for having a trigger that competes with, and sometimes beats, triggers in more expensive guns. Reviews highlight its exceptional trigger, ergonomic grip, and feature-packed design at an affordable price, plus serious firepower with those 18-round mags. Accuracy? Very good. One range review called it darned accurate, with the only real quirk being that it shot a bit low, needing a 12 o'clock hold, something that can be adjusted, or at least trained around. The TP9SF is more of a duty size or range gun than a deep concealment pistol, but in its lane, it often performs like a mid-tier competition or duty pistol. You're getting a long sight radius, good recoil control, and a trigger that would make many $600 guns blush, all for a price that regularly dips around or not far above the $300 mark, depending on sales. When you compare that experience to, say, a stock HKVP9 or a Walther PPQ, the Canik starts looking like one of the single best cheap but not cheap stories on the market. But what about the true rock-bottom options? The guns that sit comfortably under $300 and still deliver. That's where the broader budget list comes in. Taurus G 2C/G3C, the Taurus G X4 on sale, Stoeger STR9, SAR9, even the oddball like the Bursa Thunder in .380 when you want manageable recoil and a small package. A 2026 roundup of budget guns under $300 highlighted multiple 9mm pistols, like the Taurus GX4, Stoeger STR9 Compact, and others, that deliver impressive ergonomics, solid capacity, and performance that gets very close to mainstream brands, all while staying under or around the $300 threshold. The Stoeger STR9, for example, gets praise for its ergonomics, capacity, and overall performance as one of the stronger budget 9mm options in its price bracket. The SAR9, often found around $300, has a reputation for having survived extremely thorough durability testing during development, with some owners comparing its look and feel to a mix of HKVP9 ergonomics and a Glock slide. When you see those kinds of guns run thousands of rounds in user hands without catastrophic failures, it becomes pretty hard to argue that cheap automatically means junk. So how do these budget guns actually stack up in the three categories that matter most? Accuracy, reliability, and build quality. Accuracy first. At typical defensive distances, 7 to 15 yards, shooters are regularly posting groups with guns like the Taurus G3, Ruger Security 9, Canik TP9, and Stoeger STR9 that are indistinguishable from what most people shoot with Glocks, M&Ps, or SIGs. We're talking 2 to 3 inch groups in slow fire, all A-zone hits in controlled strings, consistent hits on steel at realistic ranges. At that level, the limiting factor is usually the shooter, not the gun. Some of the budget models have quirks, sights that shoot a bit low, triggers that need a little familiarization. But on paper and in practical drills, their cheapness doesn't show up in missed shots. If you actually run side-by-side drills with these guns against the big boys, the story gets even more interesting. Take a simple 5-shot accuracy drill at 10 yards. Same shooter, same ammo. Slow fire. Most people find that their groups with a Taurus G3 or Ruger Security 9 are basically indistinguishable from what they shoot with a Glock 19 or M&P 9 on the very first outing. Move to timed drills, like drawing from concealment and putting 2 rounds into an 8-inch circle at 7 yards, and the times barely change once the shooter is familiar with the sights and trigger. Where higher-end guns still tend to pull ahead is at the margins, longer distances, very tight standards, or high-level competition. A refined trigger and perfectly crisp sights can shave tenths of a second and half-inch differences off groups when you're pushing hard. But that's the key point. You only really see the gap when you're already operating at a high skill level. For the average concealed carrier or home defense owner, the practical difference between a well-chosen $280 pistol and a $650 duty gun is shockingly small. Small enough that many shooters would be better off putting that extra $300 into ammo and a weekend class instead. Reliability is where people stay skeptical the longest, and honestly, it's fair, because not every cheap gun is worth trusting. But the ones on this list have, collectively, thousands of reported rounds behind them, with surprisingly few horror stories. Taurus G, 3 variants going 600 to 1,000 rounds with no stoppages on mixed ammo. Ruger Security 9s that run side by side with Glock 19s in reliability drills without embarrassing themselves. Canik TP9s used in high round count range sessions and even competitions without falling apart. Are they as battle-proven as a Glock 17 or a classic SIG P226? No. But for a civilian home defense or range gun role, they're offering reliability that's good enough that ammo and training become much more important variables than whether your slide says Austria or Brazil. Build quality is where most of the savings show, but also where you realize how much of what we call quality is about feel and finish more than function. Budget guns often have slightly rougher machining, less refined slide finishes, simpler sight setups, and triggers that aren't as crisp or consistent as higher-end models. But the frames are still rugged polymer. Slides are still steel, often with nitride or similar coatings. Many of them carry lifetime warranties from big manufacturers. In other words, you give up some tactile niceties and aesthetics. Maybe the slide serrations are less aggressive, the trigger safety blade wobbles a bit, or the finish doesn't look as premium. But what you're usually not giving up, at least with the guns we've talked about, is the core function: feed, fire, extract, eject, repeat. That's what matters when things go sideways at 3 a.m. in your hallway. There is one area where budget guns can sometimes still lag: aftermarket support. If you buy a Glock 19, you're buying into an ecosystem: holsters, sights, triggers, slides, barrels, you name it. For a Taurus G3, Ruger Security 9, or Stoeger STR9, the options are fewer. That doesn't matter if you're happy with a stock and solid gun, but if you're a tinkerer, that's something to keep in mind. So what's the real takeaway from all this? If you've been sitting on the sidelines thinking, I can't afford a reliable pistol, I need $600 plus to even start, that's just not true anymore. The modern budget handgun market is packed with models that, when chosen carefully, deliver 80 to 90% of the performance of big-name guns at 40 to 60% of the price. For a new shooter, that's huge. It means you can get into the game, buy extra mags, and still afford ammo and training, which honestly are way more important than having a famous logo on your slide. Does that mean you should blindly trust any gun under $300? No, you still need to research, test your own pistol with your chosen ammo, and be honest about what you're asking it to do. But the days when budget gun automatically meant jam fest are over. So which of these 10 would you trust if you had to bet your life on a sub-$300 handgun, the Taurus G3, the Ruger Security 9, the Smith & Wesson SD9VE, the Canik TP9, or one of the dark horse picks like the Stoeger STR9 or SAR9? If you want more brutally honest breakdowns like this, Real guns, real prices, no fanboy nonsense. Make sure you hit subscribe, drop a comment with your favorite budget pistol and why, and share this with that one friend who still thinks you need a $900 Wonder 9 before you're really armed.